Hey, good Tuesday morning, everybody. Hope everybody had a Merry Christmas and is still hanging out with some family and friends, getting back into the work week maybe. But thank you guys for joining us here on the Volquest podcast. As always, big thank you to Exterior Home Solutions for bringing this coverage. Local and trusted since 1999. That's Exterior Home Solutions, 865-524-5888. You can give them a call for a free estimate. That's Exterior Home Solutions. Also, want to make mention as well, January the 4th, reminder at Bridgestone Arena, it's going to be Tennessee night. The Flames against the Preds. Ticket prices for that night include a limited edition co-branded UT Preds hat for alums, students, and fans. You can wear that if you're watching on YouTube. You can see what that hat looks like. It's pretty stylish. To purchase UT night tickets for the Preds against the Flames on January the 4th at Bridgestone Arena, visit NashvillePredators.com/college nights. All right, so we got some things to get into today. We're going to kind of take a year in review stance here later in the show. Hubs put out a story over on the site yesterday, and I thought it was pretty good, so I wanted to bring it on the podcast here today. But first, some massive news late last week. Wide receiver addition, Chris Brazzle to Tennessee. Awesome price. This was, you had to get a tight end for sure. That was number one priority, but feels like this was the big fish, if you will, and 3 years of eligibility remaining. It's exactly what you wanted in a receiver body, and Tennessee beat out a lot of schools for Chris Brazzle.
Yeah, I mean, they did a really nice job, Eric, and, credit Tennessee for getting him here early. You look at the two transfers Tennessee got this past – actually, let's go with all of them. All of them. Jacoby, Holden, obviously, the kid from Oregon State, and now, Brazzle. What do they all have in common? They visited early. Like with high school kids, the old adage is you don't want to be first, you want to be last. Well, in the portal, it's the opposite. And so you established yourself as a major contender early, even though a few of them took other visits. Like that visit for Brazzle stood out because he got to spend a ton of time with Nico. It was a drive-by visit, right? Like the kid didn't even do a photo shoot. Much like McCoy did from Oregon State. Two kids that they were here, they got in, they got their business done, they got out, and they just were blown away by Tennessee. And Nico did a really nice job with Chris Brazzle. Super impressed with what kind of Nico brought to the table. Having talked to Chris, and this was a big deal for Tennessee because they wanted an outside body. They get a kid that, as a freshman, was super productive. And, you go for over 700 yards and 5 touchdowns as a freshman. That's pretty good, right? So, I mean, what can he kind of grow into as an outside receiver in this offense?
I wish we would have got him on video leaving, kind of leaving campus. They were in a hurry, so it was just kind of one of those walking and talking interviews. But, I mean, he was raving. You're right. I mean, Nico did a great job. He mentioned Nico probably 4 or 5 times. I mean, I put the quote in there, saying that Nico is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, knowing that if he comes here, Nico will be with him for multiple years. It feels like, Brent, that Nico played a huge role in the fact that Tennessee has a direction at quarterback. Getting to know Nico a little bit, and obviously the prowess and everything that comes with Nico. It feels like that played a big role in getting this wide receiver to campus.
Well, and I think the other thing, too, is Nico's got multiple years, right? Yeah. And so here's Brazzle. I mean, we'll see what the NCAA rules in terms of this multiple, transfer deal or not. But if it goes and stays as a one-time transfer and you're a receiver, you don't want to go somewhere that they're going to have a quarterback for a year, and then you don't know what your quarterback situation is going to be, for your junior year, and later in your career. So I think Nico having multiple years probably helped. Austin, you made the comment about getting guys on campus early, and that's a big factor. Is that because it's first impression? Is that because so many visits are rushed and the first impression means more? Is that because kids are in a hurry to secure a spot? Why do you think that? Because you're right, it's not just this year. I think when you look overall, that's kind of been the trend. Why do you think that first visit for a transfer is carrying the weight as opposed to maybe the last visit carrying the weight?
Well, in some instances, I think that, the first visit is kind of that player's perceived favorite, right? And then there's other instances, it's just like you said, like, McCoy, again, he wasn't going to come till January. Oklahoma was dragging their feet, setting it up, and Tennessee swoops in there, gets him on campus literally the next day. Like, Willie Martinez had his first conversation with the dad and Jamad, And literally the next day, he's touring the facilities. Like they did a good swooping in, getting that set up, getting him to campus. So I think sometimes it's a combination of everything you just said. Sometimes it's the guy was like, man, I really like that. That's kind of where I'd like to go. They have interest in me. I'm gonna start there and then go from there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of a few different things. But either way, I think getting them here early is a big deal in the transfer portal. And like I've told you, the old adage, like a lot of like there's some certain recruiting rules that me and Hubs and a lot of guys talk about, like the rule's the rule, in certain instances. It's not always the case in the transfer portal, right? Like, I mean, everybody thought when Jermod McCoy left here, didn't commit, went to Texas A&M. He's from the state of Texas. It's probably going to end with him staying in his home state because he didn't get to out of high school. But that didn't happen, So, I mean, like, it's not as cut and dry with the college kids, the transfers. I think because they're a little older, they're a little more experienced, and they kind of know where they want to go, right? They don't get all caught up in the warm and fuzzies, the plan for the home state school, and so on and so forth.
Well, when you look at this edition, man, any way you want to spend it, you look at that wide receiver room now, it's got a little bit more Brew McCoy, we'll see what he does, but Dante Thornton's coming back. Chris Brazzle's, there. You got the two, redshirt freshmen stepping up now, and Chaz Nimrod, Caleb Webb. Those are, outside options. Of course, you have Squirrel in the slot. You're bringing in Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley. I mean, it feels like this wide receiver room, it's got some body types that it wants for the outside. Dante Thornton, Chris Brazzle, some of those guys, and also has options on the inside. It just feels like you needed more bodies to begin with, but you also needed more playmaking ability. And so with this addition, it feels like the wide receiver room accomplished both of those.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but I've totally misread the wide receiver room. I don't think Hubbard did, but then again, Hubbard is an expert at the glasses half empty. I mean, I thought Tennessee's receivers were going to be better, but
I agree.
Last year, I mean, I thought you can't predict Brew getting hurt, but I think certainly for me the biggest misread was probably Dante Thornton. I mean, I thought he was going to come in and be a guy. I mean, be really productive off the bat, and that wasn't the case. And Eric, I don't think it's a talent or ability issue. I mean, for whatever reason, you can just go on the practice field and Dante Thornton jumps out at you. And so there's, as you say, it seems reasonable to think that he can be a guy that is productive, once he's in the offense and gets comfortable. But does Mike Matthews play? I mean, Squirrel White was really productive as a freshman, a couple of years, 2 years ago. I mean, I think that's, being a freshman, it's a small sample size, but it doesn't seem like that's an impediment to this offense. I mean, if you're a guy, and man, I mean, when you see the offense like we have, you think it's got to be, I don't know, not easy to play receiver, but attractive to play receiver in this offense. And because of that, it's not a surprise to me that, the kid from Tulane would want to come here and look at that as, can I be a plug and play guy? I mean, Brew was a plug and play guy. I mean, he didn't put up 1,000 yards, but he was immediately productive. And it's not a surprise to me that Tennessee's an attractive place for receivers in the portal.
Yeah, I'll say this about the receiver group in general. I mean, I was of the belief that Tennessee just could get anybody open, right? I mean,
same.
And I think that you have to you go back and look at it and you give a lot of credit to Jalen Hite's skill and what Jalen Hite did, right? Like we just assume, well, he's fast, so they get him wide open. Austin, I think you got to give credit to what Jalen Hite did as a player. And I think it was shortchanged a little bit. I know it was by me because I said in the preseason, it may not be may not be as talented, but that receiver group's going to be fine because Josh Heupel can get anybody wide open. And that just wasn't the case throughout the year this year, which goes back to, you know what, let's give Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman and some of those guys some credit. They're pretty doggone talented guys. Yeah. And I think that this receiver group has upgraded in talent with what they've gotten in. The Staley kid had a great Shrine Bowl week and over there. Mike Matthews is obviously a real talent. And, I think Brazzle can step right in and be productive because he's already proven he can be productive at the college level.
Did Hubs just give somebody flowers? Is that what happened? Now they were probably dead flowers. You know?
AP, he didn't like the half cup empty comment. I don't think he's trying to bounce back.
No, I mean, I wanted to correct myself because a lot of people have told me. I thought you said Josh Heupel could get anybody open. That guy would still be open.
Turns out
that wasn't the case.
Turns out he can't get anybody open.
I'm interested to see what this offense looks like next year with added talent in the receiver room and a change at quarterback. Because I think, yeah, you can say, you know, Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman deserve flowers, but I would probably argue that throw Hendon Hooker in there as well, because I think, you know, because I'm fascinated to see, like, what does that offense look like? Does it go back to looking like more like 22? Because if it does, then you know, it draws a spotlight on probably the problem in 23.
Well, and I'll say this, Eric, and I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I'll say this: Syracuse is not very good. Okay,
yeah,
but I watched that game against South Florida, and South Florida scored their third touchdown of the game. Was a straight tempo touchdown. Had nothing to do with play call. Had nothing to do with scheme. It had everything to do with tempo. Safety wasn't lined up. They were gassed. South Florida was going super fast. That's what Tennessee wasn't able to do enough of in 23. The question is, can they get back to that tempo being the real asset to the program and the offense the way it was the first 2 years? Because it was not there this year for Tennessee for whatever reasons.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it was slower this year, and I was going to go in and, you know, talk about giving flowers to this player, that player, Hendon. I mean, Alex Golish, you know, what he did year one down there at USF is really impressive, but will added talent at wide receiver and a change at quarterback kind of get it back to what you saw in 2022. Yeah, I'm intrigued to see. I do want to ask this before we move on to our next subject. AP, say Brew's back, man. I mean, and we know they played more receivers this year because they kind of had to, but say Brew's back and you look at this wide receiver group, kind of who's the odd man out? I mean, I know Brazzle hadn't practiced one time here, but who's kind of the odd man out? Because you have Nimrod and Webb, who's gotten experience now. Thornton, who will be healthy, and you think he'll be on the outside. You'd have Brew in this situation. Brazzle, Squirrel in the slot. Who's the odd man out?
That's a great question, man. And I just don't know the answer. When we sat here, you know, right after Christmas, and I don't. I mean, you just don't know. You don't know what it takes, what it looks like. You know, I would probably tell you that Brew and Brazzle are your outside guys, and Squirrel is your slot. You know, but I just don't think you know at this point, and I think that's a good thing. Like, I think you want as much depth as you can get there. It's kind of like everybody, you know, what if you could add Evan Stewart? You do it. You add as much depth as you can. You never know. Look at this past year. I mean, when Brew went down, you had to throw in Webb and Nimrod, and I mean, those guys were solid. But I mean, like, you know, were they ready? I don't know. I mean, you know, I think the more depth you can have across the board, the better.
Well, and I think fascinating spring practice at that position, but because who feels where who has a feel for where they are coming out of spring practice, right? Or in the middle of spring practice, who you know, look, you get a chance to size up Mike Matthews and see what he is and see what Brazzle is. Now, Brew would not go through spring practice. I don't think if Brew's back, but you know, where all those guys kind of looking around in that room and trying to figure out, you know, where they are and who they are. I think it's going to be an interesting room in spring ball because they do have depth there that they haven't had before. And what does that look like for those guys in spring practice?
Hey,
it'll be a little bit. Go ahead, AP.
Before we go on, actually, Eric, you finish your thought. And once we wrap up this, then I'll.
I was going to say, kind of on that note, from what Brent was saying, like, yeah, if Brew's back, probably won't go through spring, but it'd be a little bit different too, because you come into spring last year and you had Brew, you had Ramel, you knew those guys were going to play. So it's like, okay, well, it's raining outside. Let's hold back a little bit. Oh, scrimmage at Neyland Stadium, it's pouring down rain. Let's not go today. There won't be any of that this spring. I mean, you'll have guys fighting. You know, again, there's only 2 spots on the outside, and there's like 4 or 5 guys, you know, competing. I feel like it'd be a really, really, really good battle there at wide receiver, AP, this spring amongst all those guys.
Well, and Brazzle has to hit the ground running, Eric, right? Yeah. I mean, like, this is a big spring for him because yeah, everybody's kind of, giving him a lot of praise right now, and that's great. But I mean, he's coming in from Tulane. Tulane's not the SEC, so he's got to take that natural God-given ability and then see how it translates into this league, into this room. He's got to gel with his teammates, and so this spring is big for him to kind of, find his footing. Because I mean, you look back a year ago, and I'm not going to say that he's going to have Dante Thornton type year next year, but like everybody kind of praised Dante Thornton, and then what happened? Like it just didn't translate. Now Hubbs has said it, and I think Hubbs is right. Part of the problem is probably they had him out of position, trying to force him inside. He wasn't ready for that, and so on and so forth. But I think it's a big spring for everybody, but I think it's a big spring for Brazzle just because you need him when you kind of go that route, and you bring him in as the guy that's ready to come in and play. You need him to really have a strong spring.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt. And you need him to be on the field, right? I think Dante Thornton missing as much time as he missed in spring and fall camp probably did not help him, and in the summertime as well. The one thing I like about Brazzle compared to Thornton is I know it's not the SEC, but he was super productive.
Yeah.
And Dante Thornton's production at Oregon was kind of Javonte Payton's production at Tennessee in a lot of ways. I mean, he kind of just ran the one route, and that was kind of what he did. I think Brazzle is much more developed as a receiver at this point. Now, how does that translate into the SEC? We'll find out. Should be some great competition. We won't get to see them, but there should be some great 7-on-7 battles on the practice field this spring with a bunch of young DBs and a bunch of hungry wide receivers trying to find their place.
I got this text last night, and this is what Willie Fritz told a buddy of mine. Brazzle's the most talented kid I have ever seen around at that age. He's a stud. So, I mean, when your former head coach is still, giving you the flowers, then that's a good thing. Hubbs, when you buy flowers, do you get them from the Morrison sisters?
Yes, because it's always National Potato Day.
And the other two don't get it, but that's an Andy Griffith, bro.
I've got EC. I've got no frame of reference for that.
Yeah, same here, but that should come as no surprise to anybody.
AP,
it's still busting day.
AP, would you watch a Seinfeld episode, please?
I love Seinfeld.
I
was going to say you like Seinfeld, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing. Andy Griffith it references into everything that you're discussing. You can reference it in any way, shape, or form.
By the way, I've been down here in Memphis, around the holidays, and Danny Thomas is down here. He's big. He was big into the Andy Griffith show. I mean, Andy, Dick Van Dyke. I mean, just keep going right down. I know, Eric, that's way before Kirby Puckett, Eric. Way before Kirby Puckett.
As we move on here, talking about Brazzle, last thing, and then we'll talk about the year in the review. I think this spring, I mean, it's going to be a great competition because we talked about all those wide receivers, but also those young DBs. I mean, the whole room is gone. I mean, you're completely resetting in the defensive backfield. So you're going to have guys fighting for jobs at safety, at star, at corner, and you're going to have guys fighting for jobs at wide receiver. I think that's going to be one of the best storylines of spring practice, all those individual battles throughout the course of those 15 practices. All right. Hubbard put a story out there at Volquest.com, a year in review on Christmas Day. I want to bring that to the podcast here in a moment. Quick reminder, though, January the 4th, again, it's going to be UT night at Bridgestone Arena as the Predators take on the Flames. UT Knights. Ticket prices for the event, you can go to NashvillePredators.com/college nights, and you'll also get a limited edition co-branded UT Preds hat that you can wear at the event as well. So don't miss out on that. UT night, Preds versus the Flames, January the 4th at Bridgestone Arena. I want to give a shout out to our friends over at Gametime. Again, you shouldn't have to worry about buying those last-minute tickets to your next big event. Basketball is going to be returning to the TBA at Food City Center here pretty soon. You can buy those tickets and check it all out over on Gametime. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Lowest price guarantee, even event cancellation protection and job loss protection, so they can work with you and they have your back. The lowest price guarantee means if you find a cheaper seat in the same section that you bought from at Gametime, they're going to credit you 110% of that value. Not a whole lot of places are going to do that as well. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the promo code VOLS for $20 off your first purchase. We're talking sporting events, we're talking theater, comedy, all that stuff near you. Gametime app, terms apply. Again, create that app, redeem code VOLS, VOLS, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So thank you to Gametime. And as always, thank you to our friends that bring us coverage of the Volquest podcast. That is Exterior Home Solutions.
It's one of those phone calls that you hate to get from your kids. Hey, Dad, a tree fell on my house. Well, we got that call a couple of weeks back from our daughter at her house here, and the first call that I made was to Exterior Home Solutions. The peace of mind that they gave me and us as a family when they came out here and came up with a plan, got us connected with the right people, is absolutely priceless. Use the same people that I use. In that time of need, Exterior Home Solutions.
That's a free estimate at 865-524-5888, exteriorhomesolutions.com. All right, so something we've done here at Volquest.com the last couple of years is kind of a year in review, a really good piece that Hubs put up on the site yesterday. And I think this conversation, there was a lot of good things that happened for Tennessee this past year, right? Football, basketball, Lady Vols, softball, volleyball, a whole lot of good stuff. But football is what drives the ship, of course, and the most important thing that happened this year, Brent, it all starts in July 14th when Tennessee finally got past that speed bump and it knew what the penalties were from the Jeremy Pruitt administration.
Yeah, and a lot of people will say, well, I mean, if that's your highlight of the year, then what kind of year did you have? But I think it was just to have closure with that tells of the significance and the cloud that had been hanging over. Look, nobody expected Tennessee to get a bowl ban, but you didn't know for sure. It was everything had a caveat, right? Here's Tennessee. This is the expectation. They still have this NCAA cloud. They're awaiting a ruling on this, all those types of things. So to be able to put that behind them and move forward, and what felt like a 10-year investigation that was actually about 30 months, I think was significant. I think it was a significant closure for the athletic department and set the course in motion for not just the 23 season, but things beyond. I mean, Josh Heupel didn't have to address it on the recruiting trail. Austin, they didn't have to worry about their numbers. Okay, what about this or what about that? They know what their numbers look like and what they're trying to have to get done over the course of the probationary period. The recruiting restrictions, just to have the knowledge of all of that to where you can put your plan in place, I think is significant. And it was a winding road to get there, and you could debate whether the road was driven properly all the time or not. But at the end of the day, Tennessee got what they wanted in July: closure and no bowl ban. Go compete for championships.
Yeah, no doubt. And some of that stuff, I mean, like, it's still like a small hiccup, just having to take a full week off from being able to make calls to recruits, or having to do a handful of SEC games with no recruits at it over the next few years, which really, I mean, it's kind of the Vanderbilt game every other year. But on the whole, I mean, like, it's all minor. And so I mean, I think to be able to move past that, I mean, listen, recruits don't really care about whether you can call them for a week. They don't really care about whether Tennessee has to not have visitors for a week. They care whether they can go to a bowl game. It's all perception, right? And so even a bowl game where half the people opt out anymore, it's still a perception thing, for recruits. So that was big.
Kind of staying on recruiting, 3 summer commits for the University of Tennessee, I think, really helped shape the Class AP. You had a June commit from Boo Carter that you just had to get. If you want to talk about locking down your state and getting the best players in your state, you had to you had to win over Michigan, over Colorado, some of these other programs for Boo Carter. That was in June. July, Mike Matthews, Tennessee's 5-star commit. Of course, we talked about him a lot the last couple of days. And then Jordan Ross, highest rated player on the defensive side of the football, industry ranking 4-star, but highly rated guy. I think those are 3 commits highlighted by Hubs in this piece that really kind of shaped the class.
Yeah, 100%. I love what Jordan Ross brings. I think that's somebody that Tennessee's going to be really glad they got. Mike Matthews, to me, is obviously the bell cow on the offensive side of the ball, and Boo Carter could be on the field quicker than any of them. Especially with all the changes in the secondary. So yeah, I'm fascinated to kind of see how some of this stuff plays out. But again, Tennessee's class good, solid. It wasn't great, because great requires a little bit more. But I mean, I've seen bad. So like the people that oh, they can't recruit. Yeah, they were fine. Could they have been better? Absolutely, right. And the three you highlighted are, to me, three of the guys that are most likely to play early.
Rob, when you kind of compare this football season 8-4, I mean, it was not a dumpster fire. I mean, especially considering the last 15 years, a lot of Tennessee fans would sign up for this in a heartbeat, but it's coming off last season, obviously a little bit disappointing. So there's not like that LSU game, that Florida game, that Alabama game to kind of point to this year. But one that I thought was really interesting that Hubs highlighted, the win over A&M, where Joe Milton was awful. First time Josh Heupel won a football game scoring less than 30 points as a head coach. But the run game was incredible. You had a special teams touchdown. Defense was really, really good. Tennessee played great complementary football, ran for over 200 yards against the SEC's best rush defense at the time, and was probably the it didn't start the downfall, obviously, but it helped very much contribute to Jimbo Fisher being ousted as head football coach.
Yeah, big win. I mean, and you mentioned, I mean, I know we're talking about that game, EC, but you mentioned complimentary football, and, Kamal Haddon, it makes me think about Haddon's return against South Carolina as just what we're talking about. It was 8-4 this year, and Tennessee didn't get it done by scoring 50 points a game like they did, last year. You had the Haddon interception return against the Gamecocks. You had, the kind of complimentary football game you're talking about against Texas A&M. And, that just makes me think, there wasn't an Alabama moment this year, but by and large, I mean, Tennessee won the games they were supposed to win. I mean, 8-4 is not spectacular, but you didn't have you didn't lose to Vandy. You didn't lose to Kentucky, like has been the case so often in this past decade. And the Texas A&M game on the front end of that one looked like a huge game. Looking back at it now, a couple of months later, listen, Tennessee dead man walking game. Tennessee should have won that one. It didn't feel that way that Saturday, but that's a anything could happen type game. And I think you make a good point, Eric. When 8-4, not what anybody wanted, but man, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 8-4 would have been, just like manna from heaven.
Well, you lost 3 games to teams that are all ranked in the top 10, right? Yeah. And the only one that sticks out is like Florida. Had you beat him, he probably isn't the coach there. Yep. And I mean, they've got to change.
And everybody on this podcast said that night or 2 days later on Monday that was a bad loss. That's a loss that's going to look bad, 2 months from now.
Yep, yeah. And it does.
No doubt about it. Another one Hubs mentioned is Joe Milton's performance against Vanderbilt. We won't go into details here. It was Vanderbilt, but it was a good bounce back after Tennessee just had no pulse against Missouri and Georgia. Last game at Neyland Stadium for Joe Milton, 6 total touchdowns. You look at basketball, Rob, and there were a couple nice moments, obviously, from this last year, not the current season, but the knocking off top-ranked Alabama back in I think it was February 15th, day after Valentine's Day. That was a huge win at the time, and obviously a win that helped them down the line as well.
Yeah, you just at this point in time, what is Rick's 9th year? You're not surprised when Tennessee does something like that in Thompson Bowling. It maybe doesn't roll off the tongue for hardcore basketball fans in the country when you think about great venues, great home venues. I mean, I've been a lot of places. Hubbard, I know you have. When it's good, when it's rocking, I mean, Thompson Bowling Arena, the Food City Center is as good as any place in the country, and it was that night. I mean, that was an electric atmosphere against Alabama. They came in. I don't want to dwell on it, but a lot of controversy with the Brandon Miller stuff last year when they came. So, all the students had plenty of ammunition for their posters or their taunts or whatnot, and that was a big night. But I mean, Tennessee has done that a lot under Rick Barnes. Whether it's Kentucky or Arizona, 2 years ago when they came in here before Christmas. But Thompson Bowling is really, really good when Tennessee's good and when they have a worthy opponent, and that was a big time night.
The next one we'll highlight is the second round win over Duke to propel Tennessee to the Sweet 16. Hubbard, that was a really, really good game. Duke had a really good interior presence. Olivier Cumwa, just like the Texas game, man, he went off 27 points, 22 minutes, 10 of 13 from the field, had three of 4 from behind the arc. He was really good, but that was just a good game, a good win for Tennessee playing all around basketball, and a win that over a blue blood in Duke and propelled them to the Sweet 16, which is always always a very successful season when you look back on it.
Well, and obviously the next week in New York was a huge disappointment not to be able to capitalize on that for sure. But Rob, I mean that game was against Duke was, that was Tennessee putting it all together, and Tennessee made every play down the stretch of that basketball game that they had to make to win the upset. Everybody sort of penciled Duke in or inked Duke in to advance there, but what impressed me was Tennessee had the lead, and you kind of wondered could they hold on. And they just made every play that they had to make down the stretch of that game to hold off Duke and to win. And Tennessee won that game. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't anything, Tennessee was a better basketball team that day. But you kept waiting on a run, and Tennessee just never let one of those runs happen for them against them in the second half, which was really impressive.
And they just beat them up. I mean, that day. And talking to I was going to say talking to the kids after the game, but that is going to cancel out my point. Talking to Tennessee's players after the game, so we were vividly. I mean, they like Josiah, those guys. They're like, man, those are kids. Olivier was like, we're not going to get beat by a bunch of freshmen. Not Tennessee is a team always under Rick. The faces change, but they pride themselves on toughness. And that game against Duke, to me, I mean, that was just that's what it boils down to. It was toughness and man, I mean, I didn't know how the game was going to work out beforehand, but about 5 minutes in, me and a lot of other people were like, man, Tennessee's pushing them around. I mean, and it was just it really was. It was men against boys.
Then another one for basketball that we'll highlight, Austin, it was not the commit of Dalton Knecht, but it was that exhibition win at Michigan State where Knecht went off for 28 points. And I think, everybody was just kind of sitting there like, okay, that was impressive. I mean, is this going to be something? Then he continued to do it and be Tennessee's most prolific scorer early in the season. And once you got into the regular season, a little bit of a slump right now, but I think the addition of Dalton Knecht is obviously going to be huge. If Tennessee wants to go where it wants to go, he's got to get back to scoring the basketball and being efficient. But that exhibition, though it didn't count as a win or loss, Tennessee did win it. And seeing the kind of the coming out party for Dalton Knecht is, I think, something that was a highlight from this past year.
Yeah, it was. It was certainly an important game. Rob, when you look at it, we talked earlier about Chris Brazzle and kind of can he make that adjustment? What does it look like in the SEC? With Dalton Knecht, Rob, you had the same question, right? I mean, in Northern Colorado, he's scored everywhere he's been. But what does it look like against the big boys? I mean, what does it look like? And he's got a couple of games against the big boys where he's looked really good. Now, he's got to clean some things up and all that kind of stuff. But he certainly – Tennessee fans' outlook on this team's ability to score changed with what Dalton Knecht showed at Michigan State because they hadn't had a guy kind of do that. And to do that in his first rip with Tennessee's offense was noteworthy for this basketball program. And we'll see how noteworthy it becomes as the season progresses. But he certainly pronounced his arrival in that day.
Yeah, and Hubbard, AP, Eric, I mean, you guys always know. I mean, off-season workouts, whatever – you hear stuff, but you never know how much to put into it. And so, I mean, there were rumblings all summer. Man, Dalton's killing people in the gym. Knecht is, he's busting people up, and so we all heard that. But man, I mean, he's way better than I expected. And Hubbard, that he looked okay in Italy. I mean, yeah, that guy can play. Yeah, that he looks like an SEC player. But that Michigan State game, the behind the back dunk and 28 points, even if it wasn't exhibition, he was still the best player on the court, in a game with two top 10 teams. So he's been, you hear hype all the time. Dalton is the rare instance where a guy's actually better than advertised.
Yep, and he will have to be big for Tennessee down the stretch as it gets into SEC play and working towards March. A huge addition for Tennessee, obviously, and that was certainly his coming out party against Michigan State. Let's look to baseball now. A lot of good moments, but not early on, Austin Price. We'll try this again. The Vanderbilt series was the turning point for Tennessee's season. Game 1, Tennessee was down. A dramatic comeback in Game 1 over Vanderbilt. That was kind of the coming out, the welcoming party for Chase Burns out of the bullpen as well. 2 ninth-inning home runs. A great defensive play. Tennessee walks it off in extra innings. That changed the season for Tennessee baseball that eventually went on to make it to Omaha.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you go back and they were a struggle bus early on SEC play. I mean, the awful series at Missouri, only equaled by the awful offensive performance by Tennessee in football at Missouri. That just kind of couldn't find their footing early. They had no juice. They had no mojo. They weren't playing together. And then that Vanderbilt series did flip it around because what they had back-to-back sweeps, right? They turned around and got a sweep the next weekend as well. Isn't that right, Eric? I know they won the next weekend, but
they went to Mississippi State. They went and swept Mississippi State.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Boom. See? And so, it just kind of got the mojo going. And you're right. It took the comeback in game one to kind of wake them up, and all of a sudden they win game two, they win game three, and they won those games all in different fashion, right? Like, sometimes they needed like early in the series, they needed the bats to get going when they finally did. Then they won it with some pitching later in the series. So, that was a big series for Tennessee's baseball team. And again, super talented. And it's why you don't especially in baseball, you don't panic if you start slow. Much like Tennessee's basketball team. They lost those 3 quality opponents there early in the year, a couple out in Maui, and then at North Carolina. You don't panic. It's November and December. And so Tennessee's baseball team was able to find its footing, kind of get some mojo going, and then made the run that they made, obviously winning over Clemson and then going down to, Southern Miss and, Eric dominating the local Applebee's there in Hattiesburg.
Yeah, I mean, Tennessee was 5-10 in conference play at the time of the Vanderbilt series, and you were to that point, Brent, where you were talking, all right, Tennessee's got to win this out of this many out of its next this many to even have a shot at getting to a regional. I'm not hosting a regional or anything, and Tennessee turned it on, finished 10-5 in conference play the rest of the way. I mean, it was truly awesome, and it sparked from that game 1 win against Vanderbilt. Getting into regional play, Tennessee goes to Clemson. It wins its first game against Charlotte. It's in the game of all rewrites, Rob Lewis, when I had to rewrite the how it happened piece or the 4 quick takes like 5 different times. Tennessee was down in the top of the 9th inning, down to its 2 strikes. Zane Denton blasts a 3-run home run to take the lead. Tennessee gives up the lead in the bottom of the 9th inning. You go on to win this in 14 innings, but I mean, you had in the 11th inning, I believe it was bases loaded, no outs, and Chase Burns gets out of it with a strikeout and a 4-6-3 double play with Ethan Payne at first base because he came on as a pinch runner. I mean, this game had it all. Ultimately, Tennessee won it, but that was a huge win for Tennessee to keep its season alive, obviously, and to kind of pick up momentum again as it took it all the way to Omaha.
Yeah, AP, you know what I remember most about that night was Hubs on the group text. Never gave up hope.
I mean, a minute ago, Rob, if you ever wanted to know who Hubs was, Eric teased him up. Eric teased him up a minute ago. Talk about the win over Duke as a positive, right? And he immediately goes, "Well, the fall, you don't know huge letdown." Like
Florida Athlete.
Your topic was the Duke win. You took it the next week to the disappointment.
That's what I remember about that baseball game was Hub on the group text all night long. They got it. Tony's got this. Tony's got this. Don't worry, guys. Tony's got it.
All right, I'm done.
But seriously,
Merry Christmas to me.
But that's just been. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say it's one of the reasons, but it's the way that this baseball team, man. I mean, I'm a casual observer. I'm not in it like you are all the time, but just my wife is into it, my kids are into it, and it's. I mean, I think a lot of it is because of that game is not atypical. I mean, they're just fun to watch, and they. It's never over with these cats. I mean, it looks miraculous, but I mean, how many times can you point to games like that in the last 2 or 3 years where, they've gotten it done, like goosebump moments?
Yeah, down to the last strike a couple times. Truly the Cardiac Kids. You saw in that Clemson game that ultimately they came from behind again. Its first win in Omaha since 2001. Chase Burns again was brilliant out of the bullpen. You had Christian Moore, a huge 2-run single. Tennessee was down a couple runs, came back, and looked good against Sanford for its first win in Omaha since 2001. So a lot of good moments. Highlighted that over at Volquest.com, did Brent Hubs, but wanted to bring this here on the show as we kind of say goodbye to 2023 and look ahead to 2024. But before 2024 gets here, we'll have the Mailbag Podcast later this week. We will continue to break down Tennessee and preview Tennessee and Iowa in the Citrus Bowl. Recruiting, transfer portal news, hoops, all that and more. It is at volquest.com. Appreciate you guys for being here. Appreciate Exterior Home Solutions for making all this coverage possible. Local trusted since 1999. You give them a call today at 524-5888 and visit them online at exteriorhomesolutions.com. For Austin Price, Brent Hubbs, Rob Lewis, I'm Eric Kane. Appreciate you for being here on the Volquest Podcast.